Hello, my name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar, which is entitled Ottawa Motorcycle Safety Strategy with Stefan Sang from True North Safety Group. And just before I introduce Stefan, I want to talk a little bit about CARSP in case you're not familiar with us. It stands for Canadian Association of Road Safety Professionals. We're a national nonprofit association that's multidisciplinary, and we're dedicated to supporting road safety professionals in Canada and globally. Our vision states that by following Vision Zero principles in our research and practical approaches to achieve zero deaths and serious injuries on Canada's roads. I also want to mention that CARSP offers free monthly webinars to our members. And if you're not a member, I highly recommend that you check it out. It's very affordable and you can learn more on our website. Also, I want to acknowledge that this past Sunday was World Day of Remembrance for Road Crash Victims. And this day gives us all a moment to pause and remember all the senseless and preventable lives that have been lost or significantly changed due to road crashes, and for us to say that we can do better and vow to do better. Before I introduce Stefan, I just want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we do take questions, but we address those at the end. And we ask that you submit your questions using the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. And again, we will be entertaining those questions at the end. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our today's webinar facilitator. Stefan Sang is a transportation safety engineer at True North Safety Group. He is a licensed professional engineer in Ontario. He has 6 years of experience in this role, specializing in road user safety and traffic operations. He has experience in conducting in-service safety reviews, road safety audits, and operational performance reviews of intersections and corridors in various operating environments across Ontario. These studies consist of data collection, review of historical data, collision data, predictive safety analysis, field investigations, issues diagnosis, and countermeasure selection evaluation to improve safety performance of all road users. So welcome, Stefan, and the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Brenda. Hey, everyone. Looking forward to sharing a little bit about the key findings and recommendations that we found for the Ottawa in support of the motorcycle safety strategy. So I will share my screen. Okay, let me know if it's showing up fine. Okay.
Yep, it's good.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, so a little bit more about True North Safety Group. We are a road user safety consulting firm. So we focus in all aspects of road user safety. We do a lot of in-service safety reviews. We provide some safety input on design work, and we also deal with legal files related to transportation safety. And yeah, my presentation today will take us through the Ottawa Motorcycle Safety Strategy, its study objectives and the approach that we took, an overview of the collision data and spatial analysis that we conducted. We also did some consultation summary with consultation with some external stakeholders, and then I'll present some of the countermeasures that came out of this study. So a little bit about the study background. Why should we care about motorcyclists? So in Ottawa, between 2017 to 2021, motorcyclists accounted for 12% of all fatal collisions, but they represent a much smaller proportion of the total road users. In Canada, motorcycles represent about 3% of registered vehicles. So that's a disproportionately high number of fatalities given the user base that motorcycles have. The table here shows the comparison of the vulnerable road users that are commonly included in Vision Zero plans, motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians. It shows the total number of collisions that involve each of these user groups. So we see that motorcyclists are a little bit lower on the total frequency. Makes sense given that they're a smaller user class compared to bicycles and pedestrians. But when we look at the severity of the collisions, we're seeing that 75% of motorcyclist collisions result in either a fatality or an injury, and that's definitely up there when we compare with bicycles and pedestrians that are closer to 90%. But this really confirms the need for a inclusion of the motorcyclists as a vulnerable road user group, and that's what the City of Ottawa did as part of their strategic safety action plan. So as part of their the road safety action plan, City of Ottawa developed a list of emphasis areas, target areas that they really wanted to focus on to improve road safety. There's 4 emphasis areas. The first one is looking at vulnerable road users. Again, that's pedestrians, motorcyclists, and cyclists. They also look into collisions that occur at intersections, collisions on rural roads, and collisions that are related to high-risk driver behavior, being distracted, aggressive, or impaired driving. And there's a lot of overlap between these emphasis areas and motorcycles. A lot of collisions occur at intersections on rural roads, and there can be also some high-risk driving behavior that could contribute to some of these motorcycle collisions. The slide shows some of the past initiatives that the City of Ottawa has taken since their most recent road safety action plan in 2019. They conducted a study of motor vehicle collisions involving motorcyclists. So this was a really pretty comprehensive dive into the collision attributes and identifying what other jurisdictions do for motorcycle safety. They also created a motorcycle safety working group that involved members of the public that ride motorcycles and also representatives from motorcycle clubs. So this group meets on a quarterly basis to discuss different motorcycle initiatives, different safety risks, and also provide input into future motorcycle safety initiatives in the city. There's also motorcycle training courses offered through Motorcycle Masters, which is an association within Canada. And what they do is they offer a range of safety courses ranging from first-time motorcycle riders all the way through the motorcycle licensing program. And the City of Ottawa has sponsored a free motorcycle course for experienced riders to really encourage the enrollment in these safety courses. And then they've also been conducting education and enforcement campaigns related to motorcycle safety. And the next step is developing a specific motorcycle safety strategy, which is where the City of Ottawa retained TNS. The study objectives were to identify the key safety issues for motorcycle riders on Ottawa's roads. We wanted to employ a data-driven, consultative, and integrated approach to doing that, and also develop actionable countermeasures for short-term and long-term periods that the city can realistically implement given the local context and constraints. So the study approach, it was a five different parts of the 5 different elements of the study. So this consisted of historic collision analysis, best practice review to see what other jurisdictions were doing. We had a stakeholder consultation, separate conversations with members of the Ottawa Police Service, the Motorcycle Working Group, and city staff. And then we came up with a list of actionable countermeasures and summarized all of that in a motorcycle safety strategy document. And before I get into the collision analysis, just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page of what we're considering a motorcycle for the purposes of this study. The data that we're working with comes from the Ontario Vehicle Collision Reports, and there's a vehicle type field. There's an option specifically for motorcycles, and that's what we're working with here. So there's a lot of different types of motorcycles. We have some, sport bikes that go faster, a little more maneuverable, and then we have some touring bikes and cruisers, a little more comfortable and heavy, all based on what type of riding the motorcycle rider wants to do. Just wanted to note that we did not include scooters or mopeds in this analysis. That's classified as a different vehicle type in the collision reports. So in terms of collisions, there were over a 5-year period from 2017 to 2021, there were 483 collisions. Looking at an annual trend, fairly stable from 2017 to 2019. And then we see a drop in 2020 and 2021, likely because of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, altered trip making patterns and also reduced number of people on the road. We also looked at other trends like the month that the collisions occurred on. We're seeing that the highest collision frequencies was between May to September, and often in the afternoon to early evening periods. So that suggests to us that motorcycles are used primarily for recreational riding, when the weather is nice, and also in the afternoon, maybe after work, as opposed to being used for day-to-day commuting. And in total, there was 12 fatal collisions. And again, that represented close to 12% of fatal collisions in Ottawa. Based on our literature review, we found that motorcycle age or the age of the motorcycle rider had a really large impact on, or there's definitely patterns that existed based on these age of rider trends. So some things that we found that stood out was that motorcycle riders aged 49 or 45 to 59 represented 2/3 of all deaths on involving motorcycle, and represented 35% of injuries. A lot of different reasons for this. You might have more time and money to ride at that age group. There may be new riders or riders that are returning that haven't ridden for a while. Also reduced reaction time. This was definitely consistent with trends that we saw in other jurisdictions where this 45 to 59 age group represented a large proportion of fatal and injury collisions. We're also seeing that riders aged 25 to 34 represented around a quarter of all deaths, and a little more than 20% of all injuries. This user group, you might have a lot of new riders and some maybe some risk-taking behavior based on the age. This map here shows an overview of, or where we plotted all of the collisions that occurred. One thing that really stood out to us was this is a very dispersed collision pattern. It's all over Ottawa. We also plotted locations that collisions that occurred within 250 meters of each other, just to see if there's any localized hotspots, and those are showing up in the red dots. And so you can see that's mostly within the urban area near the downtown core and the river. We also wanted to look into collisions by initial impact type. What we're seeing here is each of the key impact types and the proportion of motorcycle collisions that they represent by severity. So the gray bars represent fatal collisions. So what we're seeing is that left turn opposing collisions, LTO, those represent close to 60% of all fatal collisions involving motorcyclists in Ottawa. We also have single motor vehicle collisions. So that's where it's only the motorcycle that's involved in the collision. Those represent around 25% of fatal injuries. Single motor vehicle collisions also represent a little more than 40% of non-fatal injury collisions. And this dispersion of severities and impact types was consistent with a lot of jurisdictions in the States and also on a federal level. So for our analysis, we really wanted to focus in on SMV collisions and left turn opposing collisions, since they were by far the most severe impact types. So digging a little into the single motor vehicle collisions, there were 174 collisions and 87% of them resulted either in an injury or fatality. This table shows the driver action. So this is a field that is included as part of the collision report that notes the events leading up to the collision. The most prominent driver action was losing control. In this case, it's a pretty general field. There's a lot of different contributing factors on why the motorcyclist lost control. Could be related to speed, active weather, road surface condition, road geometry, user error. There's a lot of things that can go into a rider losing control. What was interesting was that the next most frequent driver action was driving properly. In theory, if you're driving properly, you wouldn't get into a single motor vehicle collision. When we dug a little bit deeper into the collisions, we're seeing that most of these driving properly collisions involve a rider crashing in the process of avoiding a conflict. So if a vehicle turned in front of the motorcycle rider tries to brake or swerve and then loses control of their bike and gets injured. And here's a map showing the dispersion of single motor vehicle collisions. Again, this is it's spread widely across the city of Ottawa, a few hotspot locations, especially along Highway 417. So that's the pink line that runs east-west across Ottawa. Based on our literature and discussions with the motorcycle working group, collisions on curves and hill segments was definitely a prominent trend. So we looked into that. The mapping here shows the 98 collisions that occurred on a curve or a hilly segment. And around 2/3 of those collisions were single motor vehicle collisions. So that suggests that, okay, maybe the rider might be taking improper paths, riding a little bit too fast, riding above their ability. Again, a lot of different contributing factors for why they're losing control on these hills and curve segments. Next, we're looking into the left turn opposing collisions. This was another very severe collision type where we have 84% of these collisions resulting in an injury or fatality. One really concerning trend with this that we saw was that in over 90% of the cases, it was noted that the vehicle was at fault and the motorcyclist had the right of way. So what that means is for out of the 64 collisions, we had 51 instances where the motorist was turning left in front of the motorcycle rider. So there's a lot of reasons why, which we'll get into a little bit later. But this represents an impact type where it's a very high severity, but the motorcyclist had the right of way in the majority of these cases. So that's something we really want to identify some potential measures on how this can be mitigated and these collisions reduced. We also looked into trends for environment condition, daylight, road surface collisions for these for left turn opposing collisions, and didn't see a lot of discernible trends. This map here shows a map of the left turn opposing collisions plotted along in Ottawa. Again, not a lot of location trends. Of the 64 collisions, they all occurred at a unique location. So as a safety practitioner, one of the things we'll look at is location trends. If an intersection has multiple collisions, then we can identify maybe there's a visibility challenge or something with the road alignment that could be contributing to those issues. But with a collision pattern like this, where it's all unique locations, then it suggests that there's a systemic issue where drivers may not be seeing motorcyclists. They might be having difficulties judging gaps and variable speeds. Here's highlighting a few potential contributing factors. There may be limited visibility of motorcycles. Motorcycles have a pretty unique headlight configuration. They have a single headlight compared to other vehicles where they have two headlights. So that can make it difficult for drivers to identify that or identify how far away the motorcycle is. They also have a narrow width, so they could be anywhere in the lane. They could be to the left, in the center, or on the right. And then also for a driver making a left turn, there's there's high driver workload, a lot of things to look for. Looking for oncoming traffic, you're looking at the signal display, looking for pedestrians, maybe looking for cyclists, and you might not be expecting a motorcycle to be coming up in front of you. Motorcycles can also accelerate faster than other vehicles. So again, that makes it hard to identify whether you have a safe gap to make your turn. There's a lot of studies that are showing that motorcycles may not be taking full advantage of their braking capacity. There's different techniques to braking with a motorcycle, and studies have found that, again, the riders aren't taking full advantage or braking properly, which could also be contributing to some of those incidents. And the motorcycle eye level can be higher than that of a vehicle. So what that results in is the motorcycle might see the turning vehicle and assume that since the motorcycle can see the vehicle, that he's visible, but that may not be the case. So the motorcyclist may have a false sense of security that they're able to be seen. So a lot of the collision patterns and risks that we discussed, we presented to the motorcycle working group, and they had a lot of parallels and agreements with what we're seeing based on their experience. Some of the biggest concerns that they found was, again, concerns with visibility and driver awareness, left turn opposing collisions, and really stressing the importance of defensive riding. And also, there's some collision trends that are occurring near the spring and transition times, near the beginning of your riding season in like April, May, and June. Other things that they've identified challenges in terms of motorcycle safety is difficulty getting people to sign up for motorcycle training courses. Whether it be people that don't know the courses exist, people that don't think they need the courses, or whatever reason, that's definitely something that a lot of riders have stressed the importance of, but again, are having difficulties in encouraging enrollment in these courses. There's also a lot of risks associated with construction zones and temporary conditions. A lot of motorcyclists say that they avoid these locations altogether, since there's a lot of different hazards that exist. Things like steel plates, debris, gravel, uneven road surfaces, which motorcyclists are very sensitive to, a lot more sensitive compared to your traditional driver. And then again, other challenges with roadway surface conditions, things like thermoplastics that can have reduced surface friction compared to normal pavement. And then also crack sealing, again, reduced surface friction, and potholes and other surface imperfections that can destabilize a rider. When we had a consultation with the Ottawa Police Service, they noted that in the past they have conducted targeted enforcement activities around motorcyclists, but they have relatively limited resources, so they haven't been conducting those enforcement activities in recent past. They really stressed the importance of having education programs and making that the primary focus. They wanted to encourage participation in motorcycle training programs, stress the importance of pre-ride safety checks, and also refreshing motorcycle handling skills early in the riding season. And again, they also found that that 45 and older age demographic was a demographic that they had a lot of challenges with and experience a high risk compared to other ages, especially with new and returning riders. So when we were coming up with our different countermeasures, we wanted to approach it from, we wanted to have a safe systems approach. So this really looks at anticipating that humans make mistakes, but making sure that we're designing and managing our road infrastructure to keep the severities low. There's a lot of different elements that go into safe systems. We have safe road users, safe vehicles, safe road design, safe speeds, and post-crash care and land planning, which in this case aren't as relevant, but identifying that it's a system of solutions that can help us achieve the goals of Vision Zero of reducing roadway fatalities and injuries. So our countermeasures were grouped into, again, focusing on safe drivers, safe motorcycle riders, providing safe roadway infrastructure, and trying to manage speeds to reduce the likelihood and severity of collisions. We had three different countermeasure types, engineering. So this is related to roadway geometry, roadside safety devices, and data collection. Just noted for the engineering, since all of the motorcycle collisions were so distributed throughout Ottawa, that makes it difficult for us to identify key corridors or intersections where key infrastructure updates could be made. So because of that, we really wanted to focus on the education side of things, making sure that motorcycle riders know safe riding practices, and also educating drivers on how to share the roads with motorcycle riders. And then also enforcement to encourage safe riding behavior. When we looked into our education countermeasures, we really wanted to focus efforts related to new and returning riders. What skills should we teach them to get started with safe riding practices? And then there's also the experienced rider education program. These are the people that have been riding for a long time. They ride a lot throughout the year. So what other skills could we teach them again, for safe and defensive riding practices? The other half of the equation is looking at the drivers themselves. A lot of drivers might not be aware of the different challenges and concerns that motorcycle riders have. So just making sure that they're cognizant of that, and that the motorcycles are on the road and the road needs to be shared. And also just some general safety education for motorcycle riders. So some key messaging that we looked into was defensive and safe riding practices, the importance of using protective equipment, especially when you get into a crash. That could really reduce the severity of the collision that occurs. These are also techniques to increase visibility, making sure that you're helping drivers see you. A lot of the consultation that we had really boiled down to, even though, if you're a motorcycle rider, you might have the right of way. At the end of the day, if you're getting into a collision, you're the one that's going to be really hurt. So making sure that safety, that you're taking responsibility for your own safety, you're doing as much as you can to protect yourself. So a few examples that we've seen of some safety campaigns is shown here. So we have fool's gear, cool gear. So on one half we have someone in in street clothes, and on the other half, we have proper protective equipment, just noting the differences between the two in the event of an impact. And again, some messaging that could be related to this is you're spending a lot of money on your motorcycle, up like tens of thousands of dollars maybe. So making sure that you have the protective gear to match your motorcycle's cost. We also have some driver awareness campaigns. There's a lot of different campaigns that are out there, but some of these are focused on making sure that drivers are cognizant of motorcyclists, that they're checking their mirrors, that you're checking your blind spots, since again, motorcycles can accelerate quickly and they're a lot smaller than a typical vehicle. This one looks at how motorcycles can blend in with your surroundings. If you're wearing dark colored clothing or other grays or blacks and you're under a tunnel, then again, their visibility can definitely be reduced, and just to keep an eye out for those motorcycle riders. We developed an education campaign calendar throughout the year. In Ottawa, they already designated May as Motorcycle Safety Month, since that's when they found the transition starts, weather starts to get nicer and motorcycles are more present on the roads. But we wanted to look into some additional messaging that they can do. So we suggested that in March to April, the pre-riding season, this is where we encourage enrollment in different motorcycle safety courses, encourage people to refresh their motorcycle handling skills, whether this be in a parking lot or on some quieter roads, making sure that they can they remember how to ride a motorcycle, how to steer properly, how to swerve, and also emergency braking practices. And then also stressing the importance of wearing proper protective gear and equipment in the case that you do get into a collision. But between May to June, so this is the start of motorcycle riding season. This is where we would want to increase the driver awareness campaigns that it's starting to be a motorcycle riding season. Be careful and be cognizant of other motorcyclists on the road. Stressing defensive motorcycle riding practices for motorcycle riders, and again, protective gear and equipment use. And then for the remainder of riding season up until September, just ongoing driver awareness and defensive riding practices. The city already has some curriculum that they've developed for motorcycle safety courses, but through consultation with the motorcycle working group and some team members that are motorcycle riders themselves, we developed a list of potential content that could be included in those safety courses. So looking at vision and scanning, making sure that you're wearing, again, proper riding gear, emergency braking and swerving, how to properly brake in the event of a conflict or a potential collision so that you can stay stable on your bike, and also how to avoid potentially hazardous situations and what to do if you're in one. Again, since I noted before that there are some limited resources for targeted motorcycle enforcement, in the event that the Ottawa Police Service wants to do some focused efforts, these three categories are traditionally what has been focused on. So looking at speed and high-risk behavior, impaired driving, and also unlicensed riding, just making sure that anyone riding a motorcycle on the streets has some level of basic knowledge on how to safely handle their motorcycle. And that was the education and enforcement side of things. We've also identified some engineering countermeasures to help the city provide the safe infrastructure for the motorcycle riders. So I'll quickly take us through a few of them. So the first one is just looking at addressing the issue that there's a lack of data related to motorcycle riders in Ottawa. So the city has a pretty comprehensive data collection program. And one thing that they could modify was to include a separate motorcycle class as part of their intersection turning movement counts and volume collection. Right now, they're just classified as a car, but some of the methods that they have with data collection, they can classify motorcyclists as a unique class and get an idea of which roads have higher motorcycle volumes. And then also doing some surveys to better understand the motorcycle users, demographic data, travel patterns, what types of motorcycles they ride, experience, whether or not they use safety equipment. And then that way they can make sure that their education campaigns are a little more targeted toward the intended audience. We have some signage related to potential hazards, just warning motorcyclists that there might be bumps ahead, pavements ending, that there's a soft shoulder or rumble strips coming up. Which other high ones? Yeah, so in terms of the motorcycles and reduced roadway friction, again, exploring the use of high friction surface treatments in key areas where there's been, if there's any trends in terms of motorcycles losing control or vehicles losing control in general, since motorcycles are also sensitive to that. And then also identifying potential alternatives to thermoplastic pavement markings. There's some studies being done in Minnesota where they're looking at the impact of wet weather conditions on different pavement markings and the associated friction properties. In terms of run off the road collisions, implementing a road safety edge, so a tapered roadway edge instead of a sharp drop off where you don't have a shoulder. This is a pretty common practice, just making sure that in the future that Ottawa includes this as part of the standard on their future roadway construction. And then also the importance of having paved shoulders. This can help in the recovery of a motorcyclist and also provide a safe space for them to stop on the side of the road if they need. And yeah, a few more countermeasures, but seeing we might be running a little low on time. That is, yeah, that's the presentation that I had. I guess we can get to the questions if there are any.
Well, thank you so much, Stefan. That's a very detailed, very comprehensive study that you did, and it sounds like it very, very well thought through in terms of all the different components and consultation and looking at all the three types of approaches to looking at it, with engineering, education, enforcement. So very, very good overview of that. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll just jump right to that. First of all, the first one says, if a rider has a motorcycle riding license in Ontario, but they haven't rode for some time, say 10 to 20 years, do they have to be retested to renew their license? And then if not, maybe they should be tested, given that riders age 40 to 50 appear to be more likely to be involved in collisions. They may have lost their riding skills over that non-riding period.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe in Ontario, if you have your M2, so that's the highest level of motorcycle licensing, I believe those license expires after 5 years. So in this case, if someone who hasn't ridden and hasn't renewed their license, they would need to start from the beginning of the process. However, that doesn't capture, if someone is just renewing their license every 5 years, they still might not have that level of experience. So that's why we really encourage people to enroll in those safety courses, in those new or returning rider safety courses, to hopefully, make sure that they have the riding practices that are that you need.
Right. So if they're renewing it every 5 years, they don't need to do any kind of test to renew their license, as long as they do it within the 5 years. Okay. So yeah, I could see how yeah, if they're just renewing it and not doing it a whole lot, then they can lose those skills
Right.
for sure. Okay, and we've got another question here, and it's great presentation, Stefan, and some great ideas in an area where we need to do a lot more work. Was there any discussion about modifying the approach to estimating sight distance to specifically recognize the limitations with motorcycles, i.e. that they are smaller than vehicles and that they may have more difficulty coming to a quick stop?
Yeah, oh, that's a good question. That wasn't something that we had looked into. Um, yeah, that wasn't really within the scope of the study, but definitely a lot of other jurisdictions have identified the potential for that, especially on the side that motorcycles are smaller vehicles. They can be anywhere within the lane, but we haven't seen any other jurisdictions that have really considered that.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely something to look into.
Okay, great. And yeah, they're piling in now, which is awesome. So another person said, did you look at licensing restrictions and the impact, in particular during the learner and novice stages?
That wasn't something that we had looked into. On the licensing side of things, that's a provincial issue. This study, we were really focused on countermeasures that could be implemented in a relatively short time span within the city of Ottawa. But we did have some conversations with the Ministry of Transportation, and not sure if that's something that's going to be pursued further. But yeah, that wasn't directly in the scope of our study.
Okay, great. And another person asked if this study is available through the city of Ottawa. So if someone wanted to get a copy of it and possibly
Yeah,
use some of the
yeah, I believe
measures.
that it's still in. We're going through a few iterations with finalizing the plan, so I don't think it's publicly available yet, but it should be. It should be shortly.
Okay, excellent. Let's see, we've got another one here. It is, how did you differentiate between lost control and speed too high for road condition collisions?
Yeah, so those fields for the driver action, this is from the police officer who arrives at the scene. So this was not something that we looked into. We didn't look into the events of the collision happening. This was just based on the interpretation of the reporting officer that filled in the collision report.
Okay, sounds good. All right. And the next question is, did you identify the percentage of the motorcycles plated in Ontario or Quebec?
No, that wasn't something that we looked into. We just looked at it at a high level on a federal basis. But yeah, in the future, that could definitely be something to better understand how many registered vehicles or registered motorcycles there are in a more local setting.
Yeah, that's a good point. With it being right on the Quebec border too, you might have some
Yep,
coming
for
over,
sure.
and yeah, and if the education is just in Ontario, yeah. Okay, so the next question is, was there any consideration of including enforcing lane use, preventing lane splitting as part of the enforcement campaign?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lane splitting, when we had discussions with the motorcycle working group, that was definitely a pretty polarizing issue. Some people feel that, well, I guess for people that don't know what lane splitting is when you're at a stopped at an intersection, and the motorcycle would ride up on in between lanes to get to the front of the traffic, or to the stop bar. Some riders feel that it's safer since they're not mixed in with traffic as much, and then others feel that, okay, you're riding in between lanes, drivers may have lower visibility. So that was something that that was discussed. And yeah, one challenge was that it requires active enforcement, something that the Ottawa Police Service didn't necessarily have. But I think we did include a recommendation about targeting that and making sure that it didn't happen, since that's technically not following the rules of the road.
Yeah, it's interesting how they were debating whether or not, and the fact that it's illegal wasn't kind of coming into play because they knew that it wasn't going to get enforced, right? So it's like, should we do it? Shouldn't we do it? Okay. Wow. Okay. The next one is, did the Motorcycle Advisory Group discuss or consider graduated licensing programs? So similar to with driving, with cars, I should say, perhaps even restricting size power for new riders.
Yeah, through our discussions with the motorcycle working group, I don't think there was too many discussions related to the licensing side of things, but they did note a lot of their safety courses that they do give talk about, if you're a new rider, making sure that you're able to control your bike, that you feel safe on your bike, and really encouraging riders to get a beginner bike and not a super bike, just making sure that they're able to control the speed that they're going and also the propulsion capabilities.
Yeah, I don't see any others. Oh, sorry. Yes, there is one markup. Okay. Can some of the strategies also apply to smaller versions of motorcycles, such as mopeds, or does the law treat them the same?
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of these strategies would apply to the smaller vehicle, such as mopeds and scooters. There's other jurisdictions that instead of doing a motorcycle safety strategy, they look at a powered two-wheel safety strategy. So that would encompass mopeds and scooters and even some e-bikes. But yeah, a lot of the recommendations are the same, since a lot of the challenges and hazards that motorcycles face are similar to the other smaller, maybe lower powered vehicles.
Okay, very good. So while we're waiting for more questions to come in, I have a couple myself.
Sure.
You had showed a chart earlier on, I think it was on slide 8, that showed less collisions, fatal and non-fatal, as well as the property damage only, because there's just less exposure. Oh, sorry, it was the one after.
Yeah,
maybe because
this one here.
Your version of your. Yeah, that the one that actually showed the years, the comparison
yes.
of years. Let me just see. Near the beginning.
This one here.
Yeah, that's the one. So it showed less, obviously, because there's less exposure. There's less motorcycles out there with it being COVID. But I'm wondering, like I've heard anecdotally from people who work and are in the motorcycling space, that people got into motorcycling during the pandemic, and there may not have been the same access to training programs at that time, and that they were more at risk. And it might be hard to see because there's just less exposure, so you don't know, So I just wondered if you looked at that at all, like what the impact of COVID was.
Yeah, so anecdotally, that was something that we also heard a lot. There's not a lot of things you could do indoors, so some people got either into riding or got back into riding. So again, potential for higher volumes. That was one of the challenges with not having specific motorcycle data. We weren't really able to compare there. I guess another thing that we looked into was whether or not the severity of collisions increased. If you have fewer vehicles on the streets, there's a potential for higher severities. I think in Ontario, that was a trend that we saw for all motor vehicle collisions in general. 2020, it was pretty similar in terms of the severity proportions. 2021, we saw a little bit higher, but yeah, we weren't totally sure if that could be attributed solely to COVID or just year to year variation.
Okay. Yeah, and whether there's any kind of like a long lasting effect, I guess, from COVID too, is interesting to look at. You mentioned before about education around making sure that they're seen, and I guess the education to drivers would be look out for them, like they don't just appear out of nowhere. I'm just wondering if there's any recommendations to do with the type of clothing, whether it's reflective. You showed one image where they're really dark and they blend in with the background. Like, was that something that looked at?
Yeah, so we looked into different strategies to increase visibility for motorcyclists. So, there's high visibility protective gear. So some things with reflective strips or in like bright yellow or bright green shades instead of just black.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you could do. Another thing that some riders have been doing is they install auxiliary lights on the front headlight. There's a lot of studies that show that either doing that or having fog lights or daytime running lights on, that can help to increase visibility, especially for identifying first off that it's a motorcycle and not a car, and then being able to judge how far away and how quickly they're approaching. That's something that the auxiliary light has really helped with, apparently.
Okay, very good. And I see we do have a couple more questions that have come in. One person wondered if we could have a copy of the presentation. Now, I know this webinar it's recorded, and we are going to have it available on our website in a few days. But it'll be just available to CARS members for the first month, and after that to the public. But I'm just wondering if this person wants an actual copy of the presentation, if that is what they're asking for. Is that something you're comfortable, or would you just prefer to keep it as the webinar?
I'll check with the client, but I don't think there'd be any issues, but I'll get back to you, Brenda.
Okay, sounds good. And I can follow up with this person after.
Sure.
All right, perfect. And another question is, any comments on the effectiveness of traffic calming and transverse rumble strips for motorcyclists, or do they introduce more risks for motorcycles?
Yeah, that's definitely a risk for motorcycles. The rumble strips that run, I guess, across the entire lane. There's the potential because of the grade differential for motorcyclists to get destabilized, especially if they're moving at speeds, at high speeds. Within the city of Ottawa, it seemed like that wasn't something that they had commonly implement as part of their normal practice. So we didn't include it as part of one of the recommendations. But yeah, definitely transverse rumble strips are that's a hazard for motorcycle riders for sure.
Okay, great. One other question while I'm waiting for other questions to come in, with respect to education, if one has a limited budget, is it more important to educate the motorcyclists or the other drivers? And I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but if you have a limited, budget to spend.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge that a lot of municipalities have, is that money isn't limited. I'm of the opinion that if you had to pick one or the other, it would focus more on the motorcycle riders themselves. There's a lot of basic skills that motorcycle riders should have that, if you haven't done a safety course in a while, if you haven't taken any licensing tests or anything like that recently, that you may forget. Just like with driving, you pick up some bad habits, things like that. So I think focusing on the motorcycle riders themselves, making sure that they're refreshed on all of the skills, enrolling in a safety course, that's something that I think that you should focus on primarily.
Very good. Great answer. And I don't see any other questions coming in. I do have one other question, and it relates to your slide that you had that looked at data. You had, or I should say, you had done research into the proportion of single vehicle crashes that resulted in a fatality, and it was around 25%. But then when you showed the local data for Ottawa, the numbers were a lot lower, but I know the numbers are low. And I just was curious why the percentage of fatalities for Ottawa was lower than what you saw in the research. And I wondered if it's because a lot of them occur in the city, so it's lower speed limits. I didn't know if you had a comment on that.
Yeah, so as part of this, that could be one thing to do with it. Within the initial data set we originally had, it included some data for the Ministry of Ontario ramps. So that's the highway ramps that tie into Ottawa's road network. So we didn't include any of those facilities since they're provincial facilities, and the city of Ottawa wouldn't be able to do anything with those. So yeah, there's a potential that it could be higher since ramps are curved and you're coming off of a 100-kilometer-an-hour roadway. So yeah, speeds could be higher there as well.
Okay, great. Well, I don't see any other questions, and I'm out of my questions. So maybe we'll just wrap it up there 5 minutes early. So I'd just like to thank you so much. This has been an excellent presentation, and well done for your first webinar presentation you shared with me earlier. I
Yeah,
mean, he's
thank you.
done other training video. He's been around the block, so he's experienced. But just this is his first actual webinar, so he did exceptionally well for that. And I just wanted to quickly share before we leave the next webinar that's coming up, and it happens on December 18th. It is called Building Capacity for Sustaining Transportation. And we have Dr. Marie-Soleil Cloutier as well as Dr. Emily McCullough, who are going to be talking about this project called Capacity. It's a 6-year research program working with municipal staff and non-government organizations across Canada and Australia to understand factors related to scaling up and scaling out of sustainable transportation projects across different city contexts. And there's 2 interventions. Anyway, you can read the whole thing. It's on our website. If you go under events and training and then webinars, this is available. We've partnered with ITE Canada for this one, and it's available for both ITE Canada as well as CARS members. So once again, I just want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you again, Stefan, for an excellent presentation, and have a great rest of the day, everybody.